A strange thing happened to me after I got my Steam Deck last year. I had never really been a PC gamer before that, unless you count the late nights playing Heroes of Might and Magic on the family computer. But that was firmly in the era of CD-ROM discs. Nowadays, PC players download their games. And one of the most popular ways to do this is via the Steam store. Now, I was no stranger to a digital storefront. By the time I got my Steam Deck, I had already purchased dozens of digital games through the Xbox and Nintendo stores over the years. So I naively assumed I would approach Steam purchases the exact same way. But that is not what happened. In fact, my purchase behavior became so foreign to me that I had to figure out what the hell was going on.
Wait a minute! Who are you?
What I hadn't realized yet is that the Steam store is a masterclass in persuasion. After reading Robert Cialdini's foundational study of compliance tactics in his book Influence, I learned how Steam convinces users to buy more games than they will ever play. And today, I'm going to explain exactly what those tactics are so that you can better defend yourself from making purchases you may regret. If you had to guess, what % of your Steam library have you actually played? If you answered less than half, you might actually be in the majority. According to this analysis of a public Steam dataset, for every 2 games that a user owns, on average, they've only played one of them. To me, that is an astonishing figure. Now, I need to caveat that this dataset was last updated in 2017, and that analysis did not distinguish between free and paid titles. So the own to play ratio would certainly be higher if you filter out any free downloads. There are also websites like Humble Bundle, which offer the chance to get a bunch of games at a time for a low price. But despite all that, the overwhelming trend is Steam users buy a ton of games that they don't actually play. I wasn't able to find similar data for the other digital game stores, but I would bet my Steam Deck that none of the other console stores yield a higher number of unplayed games. We'll talk about why that is in just a minute. But first, is this really a problem? It might not be for you, but the answer will depend entirely on the individual. At its basic level, buying games that you never play is a standard flavor of excess consumption. And over here in the Western Hemisphere, I would say most people consume something in excess, whether that's Starbucks, clothes, or Magic cards. The price we pay for this is often literal in the form of dollars, but it can also eat away our space and time if it gets out of hand. With digital overconsumption, it works roughly the same way, except hopefully you're not renting out a storage unit to stash all of your extra game files. In the most extreme circumstances, though, this overconsumption can be associated with actual compulsive behavior. I've seen plenty of Reddit posts about so-called Steam hoarders who have accumulated thousands of games in their digital libraries, and they can't figure out how to stop buying them. Hopefully you don't fall into that category, but wherever you sit on the spectrum, my goal for this video is to equip you with the knowledge to identify how Steam hijacks our rational decision-making. Let's get into it. We'll start with the most overt tactic. If you have a Steam account, then you're probably familiar with the extensive promotional strategy of their limited time sales. But have you ever wondered what makes an effective sale and why they have such a powerful impact on us? I was not really prepared for how often Steam games get marked down. It makes mattress stores and car dealerships look tame. During my first year as an active Steam user, I was assaulted with an arsenal of different sales events throughout the year. The biggest ones are the seasonal sales, which typically offer lower prices on a significant chunk of the site's catalog for a couple weeks. These get the most marketing and are usually highly anticipated by the community. But there are tons of other sales events mixed in between throughout the rest of the year. You'll see daily deals and weekend sales, publisher events, and genre-specific promotions. It's relatively constant. And the effect is that no matter the day, you can always find something interesting that's on sale. So to state the obvious, Steam didn't invent this tactic. I assume the concept of a sale came only shortly after the invention of money itself. But not all sales are created equal. The most effective sales will leverage the principle of scarcity. In his book, Cialdini describes scarcity as a psychological trigger that compels us to act when we believe something is rare or limited. My most vivid experience with scarcity came at the peak of the Livestrong craze, circa 2004. Until I learned about this principle, I could not have explained why I wanted one of those yellow wristbands so badly that I would plead to my parents to drive me around town to all the sporting goods stores to see if they had any in stock. But the answer is unmistakable to me now. A small group of kids at school had one. I could not get one, therefore I desperately wanted one. Steam sales are chronically preying on our weakness to the principle of scarcity. With every sale comes a countdown. Special promotion, 35% off. Offer ends in 2 days. Constraining the sale to a specific and relatively short timeline invokes scarcity. When the clock is ticking, we suddenly feel compelled to act, or we risk losing that desirable price point. Just imagine the pain we'd feel thinking about that missed opportunity if we end up buying the game at a higher price later on. But this raises an important question. Why are Steam sales still effective if they happen all the time? After all, if a sale is common, then by definition that makes it less scarce. The answer to this question will become even more clear as we talk about the other tactics at play here, but one critical difference between Steam and console stores is the sheer number of games in the catalog. Based on data I found, Steam may have more than 10 times as many titles listed than Microsoft's Xbox store, for example. The simple explanation for this is twofold. Number one, Steam's audience is massive. And number two, they've made their platform especially attractive for developers. Recent estimates put the global number of PC players close to 900 million, while the total console audience sits just north of 600 million. And that gets broken into even smaller slices when looking at specific consoles with their own dedicated storefronts. Because Steam wants to cater to all types of PC players, it's built a focus on being an appealing platform for smaller and indie developers. With lower barriers to entry, good controls over game management, and a handful of helpful community features, Steam has become an extremely popular place to publish games. So yeah, Steam is always running a sale, but it has a pool of 100,000 options that will be included or excluded from each of those promotions. When you do happen to get an alert that a big AAA game is 50% off, scarcity still applies because that game is not always 50% off. And you can only speculate when you think the developer may mark it down in the future. Steam targets our deep primal FOMO with its extensive sales promotions. But there is another, more sophisticated tactic working quietly in the background to maximize the effectiveness of these promotions. On the surface, Steam's wishlist functionality seems like standard fare for a shopping platform. Load up any number of online stores and I'd expect a wishlist feature in nearly all of them. It's a simple mechanism to save products for easy access at a later date. But as I started engaging more with the wishlist functionality on Steam, it just seemed to hit different. A big reason I decided to buy the Steam Deck was to get access to indie titles that hadn't been ported to my main console yet. So one of the first things I did after booting up my new device was to load up the store and check out a few games I'd heard about recently. As I explored, I quickly realized that the algorithms powering the store experience seemed to be tuned quite well. It was just really easy to find interesting looking titles that weren't on my radar. Steam does a great job highlighting certain games in the user experience that tend to catch your eye and make you curious. And even though I was new to the platform, I had somehow already been trained to take the exact actions that Steam wanted me to take. It wanted me to add all of those curious-looking games to my wish list. About an hour later, I finally checked my list, and I probably had 15 games in there already, many of which I had never heard of prior to that. In my mind, that act of wishlisting was just a convenient way to save those titles so that I could look into them later. But in reality, I had walked straight into Steam's compliance trap. In Influence, Cialdini describes what he calls the principle of commitment. His research showed that people have a strong need to act consistently with prior behavior. For example, if you tell a friend you'll help them move into a new apartment, you're pretty likely to uphold that commitment. And if you told them in front of others, making it a more public declaration, the chance of you flaking is very low. In Cialdini's words, once we have made a choice or taken a stand, we'll encounter personal and interpersonal pressures to behave consistently with that commitment. Those pressures will cause us to respond in ways that justify our earlier decision. When I added those games to my wish list, I wasn't just saving them to look back on. I was unknowingly making a commitment to those games, signaling to my future self that I was interested in owning them. Once a game is on the list, Steam begins its war of attrition, a relentless nudge campaign that it will wage until you finally cave. You'll receive an email every time the price drops, and as we've established, these price drops are not uncommon. So, over time, what started as a thoughtless act can evolve into a powerful need to behave consistently with your prior self. All it takes is the right discount. At this point, we've set the stage for Steam's devious compliance theater. There's just one piece missing: the audience. Imagine you're sitting at a Broadway show for a play you've never seen before. And suddenly, during the passionate, emotional climax of the show, the woman sitting to your left starts laughing out loud. You look at her, confused, but then you notice other people in your row starting to laugh. Within seconds, the entire theater erupts into a roaring giggle. As far as you can tell, there is nothing remotely funny about what's happening on stage, but everywhere you look, you see laughter. What do you think you'd do in this situation? As Cialdini would describe, it is fundamentally human to want to copy the behavior that you witness in this moment. You just can't help it. Humans evolved to trust other humans. And even though your rational brain can't make sense of the laughter, your monkey brain will justify it because it's reacting to a crystal clear signal from your fellow human beings. So, what do these signals look like on Steam? Effectively, it's the percent of people in the audience who are laughing. Steam ratings are profoundly important to this story. In my opinion, they tie everything together. Over time, the internet and most companies have converged toward a highly consistent approach to rating systems. Numeric scales, typically either 5 or 10 points, are by far the most common. Amazon, Uber, Airbnb, these platforms all depend on their 5-star scales to communicate the quality of their products and services to potential customers. And for the most part, video games are also subject to this kind of numeric scale. It's how we get Metacritic averages for games. Because the majority of review outlets will use some kind of numeric evaluation. While definitely not perfect, averaging numeric ratings can give a fairly descriptive summary of user sentiment. Without any additional information, we can reliably conclude that a game with an average rating of 9 out of 10 is going to be a safer bet than a game that's a 7 out of 10. The Steam store doesn't use a numeric scale, at least not in the way I've described. When you review a game on Steam, you're only given 2 choices: recommended or not recommended. And the number that gets displayed on a game's store page is the percent of players who recommended the game. So for example, if 850 out of 1,000 players recommend a game, it would show a rating of 85%, and it would qualify that number as very positive. So how is this so different from the other kind of numeric scale? I see two critical differences. First, it tends to skew positive. That binary question of recommended or not is simply a lower bar for success. A 7 out of 10 game on the numeric scale could easily reach 80% or higher on Steam, because a lot of people would still recommend a 7 out of 10 game, even though that's considered pretty average on the numeric scale. The second difference is that the way we interpret percent recommended is fundamentally distinct from the way that we interpret a numeric average. Because when we read that 85% of players recommend a game, we instantly create a mental image, an image that shows an overwhelming majority of fellow human beings telling us to play this game. Think back to the theater example. Seeing an 85% rating on Steam is like seeing the vast majority of the audience laughing. It's no longer an abstract evaluation. It is a vivid depiction of social proof. This is the final principle of persuasion that Steam uses to sell us more games. Social proof dictates that we are more likely to take an action if we see others doing it, and especially in situations when we're uncertain. This trait has generally benefited humans. If you're walking up to a building and you suddenly see dozens of people shouting and sprinting out the front doors, you probably want to copy that behavior. But in some cases, social proof can mislead us. Amazon products have a notoriously high percentage of fake customer reviews, which try to target our reliance on social proof to sell shitty products. While I don't think Steam has the same kind of problem with fake reviews, it is leveraging the power of social proof through a rating system that's anchored in vivid imagery and connotations of tribal approval. Now, with these three principles of persuasion in mind, scarcity, commitment, and social proof, we can see how this whole production plays out. The scene starts with you booting up the Steam store. You were hoping to check out a game your friend told you about, but upon loading the store, you're greeted with a full-screen banner. It's the summer sale, and it ends in 3 days. Instantly, scarcity has kicked in. You feel a subtle pressure building inside you. Despite skimming an email about it the week prior, you hadn't spent any time to review the discounted games yet. Hearing that clock ticking in the back of your mind, you head over to your wish list. And as you scroll through, you spot a mouth-watering 75% off tag slapped next to Marvel's Midnight Suns. Commitment struts out onto the stage. You remember why you added it to your wish list in the first place. A reviewer you trust had praised the game's satisfying tactical combat. Over the past few months, you had received other notifications about discounts on this title, but none as dramatic as this. With the game sitting at just $15, you reach for some argument that might oppose this purchase, but you can't find one. After all, it's on your wish list. You must want it. You decide to check the game's details one more time before making the purchase. On its Steam page, you see that 80% of the game's 16,000 players recommend the game. With that, social proof swoops in for the finale. The image of thousands of happy players crowds out any lingering doubts you had in your head. Moments later, the game is sitting in your library, where it will patiently wonder if it's going to fall into that 50% that never get played. This is a stiff cocktail of persuasion tactics. It's not just one technique working in isolation. The seamless integration of scarcity, commitment, and social proof is what makes the Steam store so effective at selling you games. So here's my advice. anytime you have a game added to your cart on Steam, narrate out loud the story of how that game got there, using each of the principles described in this video. Literally tell yourself the story. If you hear it and are not bothered by any part of it, go ahead, make the purchase. But if you start to get a funny feeling in your gut as you listen to yourself, that probably tells you everything you need to know. I hope this was helpful. For the Steam veterans out there, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Have you built up a tolerance to these tactics? Are there any strategies you found especially helpful? I would love to hear some other perspectives. Thank you guys for watching, and don't forget to leave a like on the way out. Take care, y'all.